The thrill of competition, the opportunity for glory, the devastating feeling of loss, all while being able to bring all types of people together to enjoy an event for a couple of hours. Sports is one of the greatest things humans have, and it's been around since 776 BC. With how many sporting events have taken place, there are bound to be tragedies mixed in there. Today we'll be looking at some of those sports disasters. Before we get into that, thank you all for clicking on this video. If you're new here, welcome, and if you're returning, it's good to see you again. My friend sent me that. If you want to check out her cool artwork, it's going to be linked in the description below. You can get prints like that, tattoo designs, or just cool artwork in general. If you follow me because of my animations, just know that her artwork is 100 times better. You will be blown away, so just go check her out. As for the video, my sources are going to be in the description, but without further ado, let's get into it. Aryton Senna was a legendary Formula 1 driver. He was a 3-time champion, who was as talented as he was compassionate. He was focused on the better welfare of citizens in his home of Brazil. Senna's skill was unseen. He had a way of knowing his car as well as the roads, finding the exact places to get grip and knowing when to turn, when to throttle, and when to brake. He had it all down perfectly. Aryton Senna was born March 21st, 1960, and was always in love with racing. At the age of 4, his father gave him a mini go-kart, and at 13 he started racing, in which he was winning. A huge characteristic of Senna was his mentality, always giving his everything for his passion, sometimes even self-admittedly going too hard in the paint. Nevertheless, it propelled him forward in his racing career. He made his Formula 1 debut with Toleman in 1984, later moving to Lotus, where in 3 seasons he got a record of 65 pole position wins. Aryton Senna would then move to McLaren in 1988 for 6 seasons, winning 35 races and 3 world championships. Within this time, a great rivalry between teammate Alain Prost would spawn. In 1994, Senna would move to Williams, and it was noted during this time he would have troubles with his car, mainly with its mechanics, saying things like, "The car has its own characteristics in which I'm not fully confident in yet." On May 1st, 1994, in the San Marino Grand Prix, Senna would be racing on the Imola circuit, and he would be pushing his fast pace like usual. Unfortunately, on a left turn, he would veer off towards a concrete barrier, smashing into it at roughly 200 miles per hour. Aryton Senna would pass away with millions watching. The reason for the crash was determined to be mechanical failure. Like I said before, Senna was not comfortable with the car. One of his problems was the steering wheel's length, so his team welded an extra piece of steering wheel shaft onto the steering wheel to make it longer. This would snap, causing a loss of control. The San Marino Grand Prix in general was just a horrible event. After Senna's crash, the race continued. I don't know if racers were aware that Aryton had passed away, but Martin Brundle, a fellow Formula 1 driver competing in the Prix, has made his anger be known and has said, quote, "We raced past a pool of Senna's blood for 55 laps," end quote. And Aryton wouldn't be the only fatality in this Grand Prix. Roland Ratzenberger, another F1 driver, would lose his life on the same track only 1 day before Senna. Many believe the race should have been called off then and there, and I would agree with them. In the video of Roland's crash, you literally see medics pulling him out and trying to resuscitate him, all while the commentary kept talking about how great the cars were built and how safe they were. I'm not going to show you all that part because it's horrible, but you can find it if you want. After Aryton Senna's car crash, there was an Austrian flag that would be found in his car. Aryton would have waved it in respect for Roland. And before both of these fatalities, one of Ayrton's teammates had also crashed. Luckily it wasn't fatal, but still. This event should have been called off after Ratzenberger's passing.
So I'm quite sure what the local hospital think. They must think they're a MASH unit, because that helicopter's been coming in quite frequently over the weekend.
But it wasn't. The fatalities and just incompetence by the F1 and the organizers are just horrible, but the light in this situation is the drivers' legacies. F1 would introduce many safety protocols, like the Halo, which has saved numerous lives. Aryton Senna is debated as one of, if not the best F1 driver ever. And at the time of his death, it is estimated that he gave away $400 million to the underprivileged in Brazil. All F1 drivers attended Aryton Senna's funeral. But on a sadder note, only 5 attended Ratzenberger's funeral, so I want to shine some light on him too. Roland Ratzenberger secured a seat in F1 racing at the age of 33, which is old when it comes to F1, and I think most sports in general. But the dude was still chasing his dreams and making it. Unfortunately, it would be cut short only his 3rd Formula 1 race in. Nevertheless, his legacy is also incorporated with the Hans device that was mandated after his and other crashes. The Hans device is a neck and head restraint / support that would have increased Ratzenberger's and many others' chances at survival. Before we get into this next one, I want to remind you all that I'm just some jackass talking to a camera. I make these videos to share weird topics that I'm interested in that my friends aren't, and I don't want to bore them in conversation. With all that being said, this is for entertainment. I'm focused on sports disasters. This next topic can be linked to current events, or rather current conflicts, and that is the Munich Massacre. But I'm only looking at the sports disaster. I'm glossing over like 80 years of turmoil between Israel and Palestine. All of my sources are in the description if you want to read more into it. Alright. The 1972 Olympic Games would be a catastrophic failure by the host, Germany. This is because of the infamous Munich Massacre, one of the first large-scale attacks caught on film. Affiliates within the Palestinian militant group Black September were the ones who carried out the attacks, which left 17 people dead, 12 victims, and 5 perpetrators. Germany held the 1972 Olympic Games. This was the first time since 1936, which was peak Hitler and Nazism time. So Germany were keen on showing the world how peaceful and better they were. Yet that would not be the case, as on the morning of September 5th, 1972, Black September members disguised in tracksuits would climb fences to break into the Olympic Village. The Black September members were armed with pistols, automatic rifles, and grenades, and they would aim towards the apartments that held the Israeli athletic teams. They were able to successfully break in, but a struggle would ensue, seeing how they were trying to take hostage wrestlers and other world-class athletes. But with all their firepower, the Black September members took over. However, members of the Black September skipped over track athletes because of a hostage. Moshe Weinberg, an Israeli wrestling coach, told them no one was in apartment 2, which held the track athletes. Weinberg had already been shot in the face for attacking them, and was told to guide the Black September members to other athletes. He thought the wrestlers had a better chance at fighting off the Black September members, but the members had the element of surprise plus all that firepower, and took captive more athletes. However, Moshe wasn't done trying to help. He attacked another member and allowed an athlete to run away. Moshe Weinberg would be fatally shot after that, and he would be the first of many fatalities in this incident. Yosef Romano would try to fight the captors, but that would only lead to him getting shot and killed as well. So now Black September members had full control. Luckily, those athletes in apartment 2 had fled, and ran and notified authorities, which is where we soon find the motive for the attack. Hostage negotiations led to the captors exclaiming how they wanted the release of roughly 230 Palestinians as well as military leaders from Israel. This motive was set in stone when German officials offered blank checks to the hostage takers. This was denied. Attempts at rescuing the hostages would also be thwarted, mainly because of media. Media in this whole event was abysmal. Some early reports said that the hostages were released, but the parents of the athletes knew that something was fishy because they hadn't received any calls from their loved ones. And when I said media stopped rescue attempts, I literally meant that. They were recording police officers on roofs or disguised in tracksuits or athletes. And you want to guess what the captors had in the apartment? A fucking TV. You also can't rappel up walls and be on roofs without people noticing, which Black September members did. But still, these officers obviously look like they're trying to stay hidden, and these guys are just recording it. But one more thing with the media, they were showing the Olympics on the TV, while also cutting to the hostage situation. Negotiations eventually led to the decision that the group of Black September and their hostages would take 2 helicopters to an airport to take a plane out to Cairo, as Black September members requested it. This is where a plan was hatched by the police. They wanted to break the group up to make it easier for them to take them out, hence the 2 choppers. 5 gunmen would be counted for, and German officials for some reason only sent 5 sharpshooters to deal with them. The sharpshooters were sent to the airport to wait for the Black September members. But when those helicopters got to the airport, it was proven that someone couldn't count, because there were actually 8 members of the Black September. 2 of those members went to inspect the plane that was waiting for them at the airport. While they went and did that, other Black September members held the helicopter pilots hostage, which they said they wouldn't do, but why would you believe them at this point? When the 2 members inspecting the plane got inside, they realized something was fishy. There was no crew, including pilots. So they headed back to the helicopters. There were police initially on that plane ready to take over. However, those officers took a vote to leave as they thought they were set up to die. When the Black September members got back to their helicopters, chaos would erupt. The members had gotten far enough away from the hostages for the police to start opening fire. And friendly fire within the Black September group would also occur within all this confusion. Within this first clash, 2 Black September members would die, allowing those helicopter pilots who were taken hostage to run away. This still left all the athletes in the helicopters as they were tied and bound. This initial gunfight lasted over an hour, and the German police officer would die in the exchange of bullets. This would make officials bring in armored personnel carriers. They were also hoping that this would deter Black September members from the hostages. However, the personnel carriers didn't get there when they wanted them to, as they were blocked off by heavy traffic and the media. In this clip you can see an armored vehicle trying not to squash reporters like bugs. Anyway, these armored vehicles are what many speculate as the final nail in the coffin, as when the captors saw the vehicles, they probably realized the end was coming, and their plan of escape would not come to fruition. One of the Black September members would turn his automatic rifle to 5 captives bound in one helicopter and light them up, shortly followed by another member gunning down the remaining 4 in the other helicopter. 5 members of Black September would die during this time, and 3 would be captured. The Munich Massacre would go from 4:31 a.m. September 5th to 12:04 a.m. September 6th. The aftermath showed how incompetent German officials were to this type of situation, as they had never encountered one like this before. And initially, they claimed that the captors were too smart. However, sharpshooters didn't have infrared scopes or even the right rifles to accurately hit something at the target they were at, as well as speculation that Germany denied offers from Israel. Israel had experience with hostage negotiations, that being they don't negotiate with hostages. On top of that, the guy in charge of the Munich operations a year prior had failed to save a hostage who was gunned down in a bank. And on top of all of that, friendly fire was reported within police. And as mentioned before, the media was a huge problem too. The guy in charge of the games literally said the games must go on until 4 p.m. when they realized how dumb that was.
The memorial service, Avery Brundage, president of the International Olympic Committee, stated,
"The games must go on."
And the aftermath would have even more controversy, as most flags were at half-mast. However, multiple Arab nations kept them at full-mast. The Israeli Olympic team left following the memorial, and many other Jewish athletes were placed under protective watch. And even more athletes would leave after that for obvious reasons. Germany would create the GSG-9, and Israel would respond to the event with Operation Wrath of God, going after those responsible, and would be successful at ending many of the lives of members of Black September. The 3 members involved in this incident who were caught and detained would eventually be released, because a takeover on a plane threatened the lives of all who were on it, unless those 3 were released. And Germany, unknowing to Israel, released them. As you can tell, Israel would probably not be a fan of that, so what did Germany do? They tried to cover it up, as well as speculation for a cover-up for the entire thing, as apparently there was a warning for a Palestinian attack on the games only 3 weeks before the games begun. However, no increase in security was taken. Germany even had a police psychologist who came up with risks that the Olympic Games would face, and one of those risks was an attack by the Black September members. He was later fired after the event. Germany's need to show off how peaceful they were backfired on them, as it was way too easy for these Black September members to cause chaos, and the media only helped the hostage takers in this event. A plus side to all of this is that the level and security in following Olympic Games were elevated to the point where they should have been. Did you know about this disaster in the Olympic Games? On April 15th, 1989, 97 people died due to a fatal crowd crush during an FA Cup semi-final match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest in Hillsborough Stadium in Sheffield, England, with 400 more injuries on top of that. Crowd crush is when there's way too many people moving in one way, or an increase of people, causing a wave of pressure towards the front of the crowd, which can cause injuries, and in this incident, as we'll see, even death. The Hillsborough Disaster occurred because of failures by the organizers and South Yorkshire police, which they then tried to cover up for over 26 years. The police had failed to adequately plan for 54,000 people, and it is shown with the strategy they used called the Freeman tactic. This would funnel mass amounts of people into 2 areas with high fences, with many reports saying it was like a pig's pen. This image shows where the crowd crush took place, in pen 3 and 4. This strategy would be proven ineffective, seeing how many fans were showing up, which the organizers knew would happen, yet did nothing to prepare for. On top of that, police were also abundantly underprepared to guide fans, because the leader of the police for this event, David Duckenfield, didn't know that they were the ones who were supposed to control the crowd during this event, which who else would be, dude? The police were overwhelmed with the amount of people who had shown up and were anxious to get into stands. So after multiple attempts to get approval to open up a gate, they finally allowed it. And I said gate as in one gate for thousands of people just to rush through, and that's what happened, which only fueled the inevitable crush. This opening led people straight down to the central pen, the pen between 3 and 4, and that's when people would begin to die. And crowd crush is such a horrible way to go too, Coroners have compared it to a python who has its body wrapped around you, crushing you. And bones and organs can't withstand a crowd, so the sound of bones breaking or cracking could be heard, as well as people defecating and or vomiting. Just all out panic and chaos. And what made the horrific deaths of 97 people even worse is that they tried to continue on with the game. People were jumping onto the field just to be able to breathe again. Witnesses just recount horrific stories of trying to get their loved ones unstuck just for them to watch them slowly suffocate. The police and paramedic responses were slow. This isn't to say that people weren't trying to help on the field, but as mentioned earlier, the police were underprepared, so no matter the effort people put into trying to save people, there wasn't much they could do. So this is a little light of humanity in this whole situation, when all types of people rushed to aid, picking up sponsor signs as makeshift gurneys. Doctors, nurses, and non-medical people tried to register aid to those who needed it. Overcrowding had priorly led to injuries at Hillsborough Stadium. In 1981, a crush would lead to 38 injuries, but luckily there were no fatalities, as swift action was taken. Same with multiple other incidents from 1981 to 1989. So now you're gonna get mad, and I'm sorry for that, but it's important with this story. The police for the next 26 years would lie and slander the names of the victims, all just because they didn't want to take blame for their actions. They said things like the victims were just drunk hooligans or that they just didn't have tickets. And they did. They even told the Wicked Witch of the West, they told Margaret Thatcher that it was just a ruckus created by drunk fans when she visited.
Gotta make a move to a town that's right for me.
And there were news articles claiming the same thing, which was just wrong. Only in 2012, criticisms were confirmed true when details about the extent of police efforts to shift blame onto fans was revealed, plus errors in the first coroner's inquests. Investigations ran from April 2014 to April 2016, and those investigations ruled that the victims were unlawfully killed, owing to grossly negligent failures by police and ambulance services to fulfill their duty of care. In June 2017, 6 people were charged with offenses of manslaughter by gross negligence, misconduct in public office, and perverting the course of justice for their actions during and after the disaster, with some of those being acquitted of all charges. It took years of fighting from the victims' families just to get some sort of sense of justice. And even then, I don't know if I'd call that justice. I'm curious if any of you watched this live, as well as the subsequent bullshit that came after it, and what you think about it. This last sports disaster is going to be shorter, more brutal, and there isn't any good ending to this, so just heads up. And that is the Thanksgiving Day disaster in 1900. The San Francisco GlassHouse disaster occurred in 1900 and is one of the most brutal tragedies in sports history, and almost no one talked about it. On November 29th, 1900, 19,000 people were ready for some football. American football, that is. Stanford was going against the University of California in what's known as the Big Game. The game's entry fee was $1, which nowadays that would be like $40. Inflation and corporate greed, woo! But this $1 entry fee was too much for roughly 500 to 1,000 people. Luckily for them, there was a new GlassHouse factory right across the street with a high enough roof to be able to look into the stadium. So those spectators started heading over there to ascend to the roof. Now, factory workers were trying to get the police to turn them back away. Yet the police were more focused on making sure the stadium wasn't overcrowded. So those spectators who wanted to get on the roof, got on the roof. Inside this GlassHouse factory, it contained a huge furnace. And for glass, you need really hot temperatures to create it, mold it, and form it. And on that Thanksgiving Day, factory workers said that the furnace was at 500 degrees Fahrenheit surface level, which means if you touched it, it's going to be 500 degrees. Which is the broil option in your oven. The inside, however, had 3,000 degree Fahrenheit molten glass. With spectators on the roof and spectators in the stands, the game kicked off at 2:30. 20 minutes into the game, the roof that wasn't meant to hold hundreds of people would collapse. 100 people who fell were considered lucky, as they just fell straight onto the ground 4 stories below. Factory workers recall having to watch out for people falling down on the ground, as they didn't want to get hit. Now, I said that those roughly 100 people were lucky because 60 to 100 people fell onto the furnace. And with so many people landing on the furnace, it broke the furnace open, so some people fell into the furnace. In factories, there's a lot of rafters and stuff up ahead, and some people who fell got caught onto the rafters and had to hold on for their lives. Which is where we get a witness statement on how gruesome it was. Quote, "As I clung there, I saw the poor fellow who had been chatting with me strike the furnace. He curled up like a worm in that heat." End quote. Factory workers tried their best to help the living injured people, but some were also trying to poke out the corpses inside the molten glass. The workers were using giant metal sticks to try to get the corpses out. They knew there was no chance, but they still managed to get a couple people out. Not without being in danger the whole time. Those broken pieces of the furnace was still 500 degrees. Wires had been damaged and cut, and they were shooting hot oil everywhere. And just to add more salt onto this deep wound, that oil would soon ignite on fire, burning many, and making a rescue attempt even more urgent. This included those people who were still stuck on the rafters. On the day of the disaster, 13 people were pronounced dead, with 9 more succumbing to their injuries in following days in the hospital. And finally, the last victim would succumb to his wounds 3 years after the incident, marking the death toll to 23 people. All the victims were male, and they were mainly children, with many parents having to identify their sons by their clothing. 12-year-old William Eckfeld, whose weeping father recognized his disfigured body by his socks. Meanwhile, at the Stanford vs. University of California game, the game just went on. It paused for a second when the building collapsed because everyone heard a giant noise, but only a certain section could see what was happening, so the game just carried on. But what's weird is no one mentioned it in the sports world. Obviously, this was a huge story in local newspapers, but the 2 universities as well as the sports pages just ignored it completely. The San Francisco Chronicle referred to the game as, quote, the closest and most exciting game of football ever played by the 11s of the 2 California universities, end quote. Writers for the student newspapers didn't mention the incident, and unlike the 1898 and 1899 Thanksgiving games, there's no statue for the 1900 games or plaque. Nothing trying to remember this game at all. Days after the event, when people were looking for someone to blame, the jury was the ones who were identified to give blame, and they said, quote, the deceased had no business being there. No one can be held responsible for their deaths other than themselves, end quote. And whether you agree with that decision or not, it's sad to see a part of history so close to being completely forgotten about. I see a lot more people talking about this tragedy today, but I'm wondering if you knew about this Thanksgiving Day sports disaster. Alright, that's where we're ending it. Before you leave, I want to end on somewhat of a high note, so here's a monkey playing with some chalk.
Different types who wear a day coat, pants with stripes and...
Alright, bye.